Latin America, a vast and diverse region encompassing South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, continues to grapple with some of the highest levels of economic inequality in the world. Unfortunately, European colonialism left a lasting legacy of poverty and underdevelopment in the region, as extractive institutions were established that allowed resources to flow back to Europe, leaving Latin America with nothing but scraps. Despite being rich in natural resources, Latin America has failed to capitalize on these assets, resulting in a vicious cycle of poverty and stagnation. This video will delve into the underlying causes of poverty in Latin America, offering a sobering assessment of the challenges that continue to plague the region even in the 21st century. While Latin America is renowned for its vibrant political scene, with leaders changing more frequently than the weather, this political instability has had a devastating impact on the region's poverty levels. It seems that every other week, there's a new president or coup attempt in Latin America, which has left investors scratching their heads and scrambling for the exit. Over the years, the region has experienced a series of military dictatorships, civil wars, and political unrest. This constant political turbulence has made it difficult for businesses to plan for the long term, leading to a lack of investment in infrastructure and social welfare programs that could help lift people out of poverty. With an average of 24.5 changes of government per country in the region between 1900 and 2010, it's no wonder that Latin America is struggling to achieve sustainable economic growth. It's like trying to build a house on quicksand. Corruption is a cancer that eats away at the social fabric of Latin American societies. It leaves behind a trail of devastation, ruining lives and deepening poverty. The UNDP's report highlights that corruption has a significant economic cost, amounting to a staggering $220 billion annually, equivalent to 6% of the region's GDP. This amount could have been invested in vital services, such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure, but instead, it lines the pockets of the corrupt. The misallocation of public funds leaves vulnerable communities without access to essential services, further fueling the vicious cycle of poverty. It's no wonder that corruption in Latin America is often referred to as the public enemy number one. The sad reality is that the nexus between corruption and political instability is a vicious cycle, with each exacerbating the other. Education is a critical component for addressing poverty and inequality, but unfortunately, Latin America still has a long way to go in this regard. The region struggles with limited access to education, particularly for girls and children from low-income families. In Latin America, nearly 35 million people over the age of 15 cannot read or write, an average of 10%. This average doubles in Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, trebles in Guatemala, reaches 50% in Haiti. The UNESCO Institute for Statistics reports that 20% of Latin American youth are not enrolled in school, and the quality of education is often subpar, with a significant number of students failing to meet basic academic standards. Indigenous women are among the most vulnerable and marginalized groups in Latin America, and their lack of access to education is a significant factor in perpetuating their poverty. Moreover, the International Monetary Fund has found that approximately 50% of women in Latin America and the Caribbean are not engaged in the labor force. The lack of access to education limits their opportunities for upward social and economic mobility, further entrenching the cycle of poverty. While Latin America is famous for its warm weather, rich culture, and delicious food, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Some countries in the region have been plagued by extreme organizations such as drug cartels and gangs, which have wreaked havoc on the lives of millions. These groups operate outside the law and often resort to violence to achieve their objectives, resulting in a breakdown of social order and a decrease in public safety. The high level of violence in Latin America exacerbates the cycle of poverty in the region. Nearly 14 of the 20 most violent countries in the world are in Latin America, and violence affects all aspects of life, from personal safety to investment and economic growth. Violence leads to a lack of investment, reduced economic opportunities, and decreased access to social services, perpetuating poverty and inequality. It's no wonder that many Latin Americans feel like they're stuck in a never-ending nightmare, where violence is the norm and peace is a distant dream. Inequality is one of the biggest hurdles Latin America faces. According to the World Bank, the top 10% of the population in Latin America earns 22 times more than the bottom 10%, making it one of the most unequal regions in the world. Inequality generates severe social polarizations and promotes authoritarian and repressive patterns of social relations, which preclude the effectiveness of citizenship on which democracy is built. Extreme wealth gap has created a situation where social mobility is limited and poverty is perpetuated. Inequality is a result of multiple factors, including concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, limited access to education, and limited opportunities for upward mobility. Wealthy individuals tend to prioritize their interests, which include private education, private hospitals, and security forces, which leave the public services intended for poor, lacking in quality and quantity. Sadly, the poor are left with underfunded public schools, inadequate healthcare, and poor policing. The lack of investment in these crucial areas perpetuates inequality and entrenches poverty in the region. Teenage pregnancy is a major driver of poverty in Latin America. According to UNICEF, Latin America and the Caribbean have the highest rates of teenage pregnancy in the world, and the statistics speak for themselves. The World Bank reports that Latin America ranks, in terms of young women giving birth, between the ages of 15 and 19. Teenage mothers often have to drop out of school, which limits their opportunities for upward mobility and perpetuates the cycle of poverty. This leads to an alarming cycle of disadvantage, where children born to teenage mothers are more likely to experience poverty and limited opportunities, continuing the cycle of poverty across generations. Hunger and malnutrition are rapidly becoming the newest hobbies of the poor in Latin America. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations estimates that 39.3 million people in South America are undernourished, which has unfortunately increased by 400,000 people since 2016. Moreover, food insecurity has increased from 7.6% in 2016 to 9.8% in 2017. Malnutrition and hunger act as growth inhibitors and limit the physical and cognitive development of children, leading to long-term health issues and reduced opportunities in life. It's a pity that food insecurity and malnutrition remain critical challenges faced by Latin America, as it affects not only the poor but also the entire continent's economic and social development. The Latin American exodus continues as people flee economic instability, poverty, and other pesky nuisances such as rampant inequality and violent crime. According to the International Organization for Migration, last year alone, a staggering 38 million people migrated out of their countries, with 85% of that number coming from the battered region of Latin America and the Caribbean. This mass exodus of people may result in brain drain, as the most talented and ambitious people leave the region, while the remaining population suffers from the consequences of inequality, poverty, and limited opportunities. This vicious cycle of migration and poverty leaves Latin America lagging behind, unable to keep up with the rest of the world. Access to healthcare in Latin America is a crucial challenge, particularly for those who are living in poverty or rural areas. According to the Pan American Health Organization, around 30% of the population in Latin America and the Caribbean lacks access to basic healthcare services. This is due to various factors, including a shortage of healthcare workers, inadequate healthcare infrastructure, and insufficient funding for healthcare. This leads to long-term health issues, the spread of communicable diseases, decreased economic productivity and, most tragically, loss of life. The healthcare system in Latin America is in dire need of reform to ensure that everyone, regardless of their socioeconomic status, has access to quality healthcare services. Latin America is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world to the effects of climate change. The impacts range from melting Andean glaciers to natural disasters, such as heavy rains, temperatures rising, floods, droughts, and hurricanes, which are becoming more frequent and severe, affecting agriculture, infrastructure, and the economy. These events can lead to crop failures, food insecurity, and loss of livelihoods, perpetuating poverty in the region. Climate change also exacerbates existing social and economic inequalities, as those who are most vulnerable are often the most affected by its effects. Inadequate infrastructure is a significant contributor to the cycle of poverty in Latin America. According to the Inter-American Development Bank, the region needs to invest at least 5% of its GDP in infrastructure to meet the basic needs of its population. However, the current investment is only around 2.8%. The lack of infrastructure particularly affects rural areas, where access to clean water, sanitation, and reliable electricity are limited. In fact, only 46% of the rural population in Latin America has access to safe drinking water. Poor roads and transportation infrastructure also hinder economic growth and make it difficult for people to access essential services like healthcare and education. In addition, inadequate infrastructure makes it challenging for businesses to operate, limiting job opportunities and economic development in the region. Latin America is home to vast natural resources, which have traditionally played a significant role in driving economic growth in the region. However, the over-reliance on extractive industries has had dire consequences for the environment, indigenous communities, and the economy. The extraction of natural resources has led to social conflicts, displacement of communities, and the violation of human rights. Furthermore, the boom-bust cycles of commodity prices have left the region vulnerable to economic instability, with many Latin American economies struggling to diversify beyond natural resource extraction. As a result, other sectors, such as manufacturing and technology, which could provide more stable sources of economic growth, have received limited investment. As per reversal of fortune theory, countries that were comparatively affluent in 1500, among those colonized by European powers in past 500 years, are now in a state of relative impoverishment. This is largely attributed to the historical prevalence of colonialism and extractive institutions, wherein wealth was drained from the region instead of being channelized into building infrastructure, fostering industrialization, promoting technological advancement, education, and social welfare. This egregious phenomenon has engendered an entrenched, structural disparity that has endured through the ages, posing daunting challenges in rectifying it. The vestiges of colonialism continue to reverberate in numerous countries, where the ruling elite has managed to perpetuate their grip on power and affluence by monopolizing access to resources and opportunities in Latin America. Drug use disorders are a growing cause of short and long-term health problems, economic cost, and social burden. In Latin American countries, in average, 5% of the population uses cannabis regularly. Prevalence of cannabis use is significantly higher in Chile and Jamaica, 15%, followed by Uruguay, 9%, and Argentina, 8%. Regarding cocaine, prevalence in Latin American countries is 0.65%. Argentina and Uruguay have highest rate in the region, 1.6%, followed by Costa Rica, 1.2%, and Chile, 1.1%. Guatemala and Argentina have the highest drug-related death rates in Latin America. Poverty can lead someone to use drugs, but drug use can also lead someone into poverty. The drug trade has fueled violence, corruption, and instability in many countries in the region, contributing to a vicious cycle of poverty and underdevelopment. For Latin America and the Caribbean, the war on drugs is no mere metaphor, but a lived reality with devastating consequences for millions of people. Addressing these factors is essential to breaking the cycle of poverty in Latin America. Investing in education, healthcare, infrastructure, and social welfare programs, and promoting sustainable economic growth can help create a more equitable society in Latin America. Thanks for visiting our channel. We invest considerable effort and dedication in researching, producing, and presenting content that we believe you'll love. Kindly consider subscribing to our channel to receive early access to our newest videos and updates, and to support us in creating even more exceptional content for you.